Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatera Vanachari Yamunatera Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanand Navraja Janaranjan Yashodanand Navraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Giridhari Radha Giridhari Shri Radhe Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada John Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivraj Kachar Stuttra Shrimad A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki John Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivraj Kachar Stuttra Shrimad Bhakti Siddhanta Sarasvati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Tagore Premanandi. Start by reading from the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, chapter 37. After some time, Ambassador Keating apologized and excused himself for an appointment he had to keep. I'm an ambassador, and I have to move from the sublime to the mundane. I appreciate very much your coming. Srila Prabhupada. Now I'm also coming to the mundane point of view. Next time I come back to the USA, I wish to see the president. I can write a letter, Mr. Keating offered. I will be glad to help you. Prabhupada smiled. You're busy helping the whole world so that peace may come and people may be happy. But instead of being happy, the people of your country are becoming hippies. There is some defect, and there is a chance to rectify that defect. Krishna consciousness. So let us do something tangible, scientific, so that people will become happy. That evening, Prabhupada wrote one of his disciples about the meeting. You may be pleased to know that this morning I met here in Delhi with your American ambassador to India, Mr. Kenneth Keating. He has got very good respect for our movement, and he has promised to help me to arrange a meeting with your president when I shall return to your country, perhaps in the late spring. I've requested him to help this movement, and that help will save your country from great danger by turning hippies into happies. Let us see what can be done. The next day, while Prabhupada was on his morning walk in the streets of Delhi, he asked a devotee to get a paper from a newsboy passing by on a bicycle. Prabhupada read the headlines. Emergency declared, 3 enemy planes downed. He had a devotee read aloud. Pakistan launched a massive attack on the Western Front, bombing 7 Indian airfields and crossing the ceasefire line in strength in Poonch. The Prime Minister, in her broadcast late tonight, described it as a full-scale war launched by Pakistan against India. Earlier, the president had declared national emergency. The national emergency had international implications, with America cutting off supplies to India and supporting Pakistan, China threatening India, and Russia supporting India. Later that night, he heard Indira Gandhi's broadcast over the radio. I speak to you at a moment of great peril to our country and our people. Today, a war in Bangladesh has become a war on India. This imposes on me, my government, and the people of India a great responsibility. We have no other option but to put our country on a war footing. Prabhupada was not alarmed. War was not the only ugly reality. Material sufferings were inevitable, war or no war. Prabhupada continued to follow the news. However, and some days Shamasundara would purchase for him 3 or 4 different newspapers. After a few days at the Birla Mandir, Prabhupada and his party moved to a dharmashala in the Kamalanagar district of Old Delhi. There, Prabhupada delivered what the devotees later referred to as the blackout lectures. While black-painted newspapers and blankets covered the windows and combat jets flew overhead, Prabhupada would speak by candlelight to his disciples. I'll finish there. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, chapter 18, entitled The Prayers Offered to the Lord by the Residents of Jambudvipa, texts 24 and 25. I'll just read text 24 just once, and then 25 I'll repeat 3 times. Starting with 24. Ramyake cha bhagavata priyatamang matsyam avatara rupang tadvarsha purushasya manof prak pradarshitam sa idanim api mahata bhakti yogenara thyatidang choda harti. Translation. Shukadeva Goswami continued. In Ramyaka Varsha, where Vaivasvata Manu rules, the Supreme Personality of Godhead appeared as Lord Matsya at the end of the last era, the Chakshusha Manvantara. Vaivasvata Manu now worships Lord Matsya in pure devotional service and chants the following mantra. Text 25. Om Namo Bhagavate Mukhyatamaya Nama Sattvaya Pranayojase Sahase Balaya Maha Matsyaya Namati. Om Namo Bhagavate Mukhyatamaya Nama Sattvaya Pranayojase Sahase Balaya Maha Matsyaya Namati. Om Namo Bhagavate Mukhyatamaya Nama Sattvaya Prana Yojase Sahase Balaya Mahamatsyaya Namati. Synonyms. Om, O my Lord. Nama, respectful obeisances. Bhagavate, unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mukya Tamaya, the first incarnation to appear. Namah, my respectful obeisances. Sattvaya, unto the pure transcendence. Pranaya, the origin of life. Or just say, the source of the potency of the senses. Sahase, the origin of all mental power. Balaya, the origin of all bodily strength. Mahamatsyaya, unto the gigantic fish incarnation. Namah, respectful obeisances. Iti, thus. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. Offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is pure transcendence. He is the origin of all life, bodily strength, mental power, and sensory ability. Known as Matsyavatara, the gigantic fish incarnation, he appears first among all the incarnations. Again, I offer my obeisances unto him. Purport. Srila Jayadev Goswami sings, Palayo payodhi jale dritavan asivedang vahita vahitra charitrang akedam Keshava drita mina sharira jaya jagadisha hare. Soon after the cosmic creation, the entire universe was inundated with water. At that time, Lord Krishna, Keshava, incarnated as a gigantic fish to protect the Vedas. Therefore, Manu addresses Lord Matsya as Mukhyatama, the first incarnation to appear. Fish are generally considered a mixture of the modes of ignorance and passion, but we must understand that every incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is completely transcendental. There is never any deterioration of the Supreme Lord's original transcendental quality. Therefore, the word Sattvaya is used here, meaning pure goodness on the transcendental platform. There are many incarnations of the Supreme Lord: Varaha Murti, the bull form; Kurma Murti, the tortoise form; Hayagriva Murti, the form of a horse, and so on. Yet we should never think any of them material. They are always situated on the platform of Shuddha Sattva, pure transcendence. Ong Gyanatimurandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshura Militanyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I'll just read verse 25 one more time. Offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is pure transcendence. He is the origin of all life, bodily strength, mental power, and sensory ability. Known as Matsyavatara, the gigantic fish incarnation, he appears first among all the incarnations. Again, I offer my obeisances unto him. As we go through this chapter, we hear the prayers of the different residents of Jambudvipa made towards the different incarnations of the Lord. Different residents have different incarnations, avatars, which they worship. And in particular here, we see Manu, the same Manu who appears in the 8th canto, offering prayers to Lord Matsya, his worshipable deity. I'm sure many of you have read the 8th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, so you know the pastime of the Matsya avatar. how he appeared, and the different pastimes that he conducted while he was in the material world. And you know how Manu and Matsya Avatara, they have a relationship through that pastime. I'll speak on different parts of the pastime a bit later on. But in any case, I wanted to first speak on the verse and then the contents of the purport. Manu was at the time when he met Matsya a powerful king. He was of the Kshatriya order, and that particular position of his is relevant because in this particular verse, verse 25, he's making a prayer based around things that are valued by the Kshatriya order. If we look into the different things that he's glorifying Matsya Avatar for, we can see specifically he glorifies him for being the origin of all life, the source of bodily strength, the source of mental power and sensory ability. So specifically, bodily strength, mental power, and sensory ability are things that the Kshatriyas pride themselves on. Of course, they have to be strong physically to be able to fight against the enemies. They have to have the mental power to be able to manage a kingdom and strong sensory ability. In fact, when you read about different personalities who are kshatriyas in books like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, the Pandus, for example, you can see that they're very vivacious human beings. They have strong vitality, they have immense power, which other classes of human beings don't. Manu here speaks on how the Lord's strength is the source of his own. And if we read these verses and analyze the contents, the import, verses like these, where this point is emphasized, they bring us back down to earth, first of all. And secondly, they can also help us in our meditation on Krishna. How is it that they bring us back down to earth? Because the more that we understand how Krishna, the Lord, is the source of all our abilities, the more that we can realize our dependency on the Lord. As it's stated in the Bhagavad Gita in a similar manner, it's stated, Purusham Drishu, by Krishna himself, he explains he is the ability in man. Buddhe Buddhimatam Asmi, he is the intelligence of the intelligent. Tejas Tejas Vinam Aham, he is the prowess of all powerful men. Balang Balavatang Chaham, he's the strength of the strong. Kamaraga Vivarjitam, devoid of passion and desire. In many places in the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam, this point is brought up again, how the Lord is the source of everything. Hearing us how he is the source of our abilities, our strength, our intelligence, it humbles us because, again, it reminds us of our dependent position on the Lord. Often, maybe just speaking for myself, we get proud when we do something good, when we achieve something, when we perform some quote unquote amazing feat. The mind can be so tricky that even if you do something small, like close the door nicely, if there are other people around, then the mind can get proud just about something like that, something as small as that. And obviously, with other things that we may do when we accomplish something in the workplace, from that to leading a kirtan, giving class, often the mind is speaking, in the background. Yep, I did that pretty well. Oh, yeah, that was pretty smooth. I hope they caught that last thing that I did. We often imagine ourselves from the perspective of others who are watching. It's quite an interesting phenomenon how that is. But the reality is, without Krishna's grace upon us, we wouldn't actually be able to do anything within this material world. If it's Krishna so chooses, if our karma so destines it, if our hands get paralyzed, do we have any power to make them function again? If we get dementia, do we have much power to bring back our memory? There are many examples of people in this world who had it all, were endowed with many of the opulences that many others covet, but at a certain point in their lives, they lose. In the past, I brought up the example of Bruce Willis, the actor in the movie series Die Hard. I'm sure he would have been a Hollywood heartthrob back in the day, an actor or a man that many other young men would idolize somewhat. But fast forward from when he was in his 30s, acting in those movies to now, and he's in his 70s, he's got dementia and he can't even remember who he is. Does he have much say in the matter? Unfortunately not. That's just the way that destiny has made it. Another example, my parents used to be into this particular actor in his movies, Christopher Reeves. He was an actor in some of the very first Superman movies, I believe. Extremely good looking guy. And again, another Hollywood heartthrob. My spiritual master often quotes him. He gives him as an example of someone who had it all, but then by something seemingly out of his control, lost it all. In fact, he was very proud of his looks, apparently, and he was said to have said that when he looked in the mirror and he was admiring himself, he said, "I'm so good looking, that even I would date myself." So very obviously a bit proud. Fast forward so many years, he ended up being in an accident where he was riding a horse. He was kicked off the horse by the horse, landed like perpendicular on the ground on his head, broke some vertebrae in his neck, and ended up as a quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down. So it's obvious from these examples, and also one major example in the Bhagavatam, that of Arjuna, who, if we read about in the Mahabharata war, accomplished amazing feats. As a warrior, his skill and talent was beyond anything that we can humanly conceive of. Being able to hit targets with his arrows in the dark, being able to fire so many arrows off within a moment that it would seem as if each of the arrows that he would successively fire were connected to the one before it. No one could tell that he was firing separate arrows because the rate at which he was firing was so quick. Among many other things, such a powerful warrior. But after Krishna departed and his power was no longer relevant, as he was trying to escort Krishna's queens, his wives, from Dwarka to safety, they were seemingly kidnapped by some simple farmers, some simple cowherd boys. And Arjuna, being the powerful Kshatriya that he was, at the time, he couldn't do anything to stop them. He realized at that point how all of his abilities were actually simply given to him, endowed upon him by Krishna's grace alone. So for ourselves, for myself, this type of verse, it makes me think, if I am able to do anything at all, whether big, small, wonderful, so-called wonderful, I should be thankful, I should be grateful that Krishna is allowing me to do anything at all. Him being the source of our abilities, of my abilities, I should be grateful that he's allowing me to be used as such in his service. The second thing that I got from the verse was how, in a positive, more positive light, I guess you could say, hearing about Krishna being the source of all of our abilities, it allows us to observe the world, our lives, in relation to him. It allows us to meditate on him in all circumstances. Often we see things as being separate to Krishna. Again, if we see our abilities as being separate to Krishna, which often does happen for the average person, then we often think that we're the doer, that we are the ones who are in charge of the results of our acts. We can often see our work as being separate from Krishna. We can see our relationships as being separate from Krishna. We think in terms of I and mine. This is my partner. These are my children. We can see objects, events, and people separate from Krishna. However, everything in this world, as we should know as devotees, is just a manifestation of his energies, which are non-different from him. Prabhupada would often bring up the verse, Parasya Shakti Vividhaya Shrute. It's true from one perspective that the material world, it's moving under the spell of the three modes of material nature. Someone without spiritual vision, they see it as such. They see things simply as interactions between the modes of material nature, not necessarily using those words, but in other words, you could say they just see everything as material, and everything in this world are interacting based on material considerations. But Prabhupada would often bring up this verse to highlight that everything in this world, including the three modes of material nature, are actually just a manifestation of his energy. Everything that we see is an interaction of his energies. When you understand this, then it allows you to meditate on the things of this world in relation to Krishna. Recently, when Mother Urmila was here, she was giving Srimad Bhagavatam classes at the temple, and we were attending. She, more or less for her classes, she just read out of this one book that she had called Meditations. And that book, Meditations, it draws excerpts from the Bhagavad Gita, it draws excerpts from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which highlight how all the different features of this world are actually Krishna himself. On top of the examples that I gave before, which were from chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says things like, I'm the light of the sun and the moon. I'm the taste in water. I'm the syllable Om in Vedic mantras. I'm the original fragrance of the earth. and the heat and fire, and the life of all that lives. In chapter 10, he also explains of all lights I am the radiant sun. Of the demigods I am Indra, the king of heaven. Of the senses I am the mind. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, when it's explained, what's explaining about the universal form, Canto 2, it's explained how the rivers are his veins. The trees that cover the earth are like his hairs, and so on and so forth. So as she was explaining what was in her book, these different verses and how they can allow us to meditate on Krishna, it made me realize that there are so many ways that we can remember Krishna in our day-to-day lives that we're potentially missing out on. It's all there in the Gita and the Bhagavatam. When it happens to be daytime, we can note that the sun's out, and immediately we think the sun is Krishna. When we drink water, of course, this is a common one. We don't just think, I'm drinking water. We think Krishna is the taste in water. When we warm ourselves near the heater, we can think this is Krishna. And that way we can remain Krishna conscious in many different circumstances, which we may otherwise miss if we don't make the effort, if we don't try to meditate in such a way. Moving to the purport now. The purport has one main theme. The theme that I took away from this particular purport was that despite the Lord taking on the form of an animal, still he is transcendental. Unlike normal animals, he taking the form of an animal, coming down as a fish, as a boar, as a horse. He is unaffected by the modes of material nature. Specifically, if we look at Matsya, Matsya comes as a fish. Fish are generally in the mode of ignorance, and it's even said in Shastra that they're lower in the evolutionary scale than plants. If we look at plants, plants, as we can see just by looking at them, they're of a pretty low level of consciousness, but the Shastra explains that fish are of an even lower level of consciousness, surprisingly. According to the evolutionary scale, first you start as aquatic life, then you go to plant life, tree life, insect life, bird life, beast life, mammals, and then human life. And then on further than that, civilized human life. Prabhupada explains that this is the process of evolution in consciousness and species as one transmigrates through all the different species of lives. Despite Krishna coming in the form of a fish or an animal of any sort, he is transcendental to the three modes. The problem is that those who lack the proper vision which is acquired through wisdom, through knowledge, they consider all his forms as material. Even to the point of his Swayam Bhagavan form, his form is Krishna as a cowherd boy, as a human being, seemingly. However, there are ways that we can prove his transcendence. Before that, the relevant verse that Krishna brings up in the Bhagavad Gita, which highlights this particular issue, is verse 11 of chapter 9. Avajananti ma mudha manushintanamashritam parang bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. He explains how people without the correct vision, they deride him when he descends in the human form, what to speak of any form, because they do not know his transcendental nature as the supreme Lord of all that be. as I was reading this purport, I was thinking as well, why does there need to be such an emphasis on him being transcendental? Often when I'd read through such sections of the Bhagavad Gita or the Bhagavatam where it explains this point, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Krishna's transcendental, but how's that relevant to me in my life? And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking how unconsciously we carry many misconceptions about Krishna. It's said that instinctively human beings, they rank the human species as being higher than animals, for example. It's true. Like human beings are of a high level of consciousness than animals. Materially speaking, that's true. So when God appears in an animal-like form, humans may subconsciously think that this is not supremacy, this is regression. In other words, because he's appearing in an animal form, it constitutes him not being the supreme because animals, again, are of a lower level of consciousness, lower level of existence than the human being. As well as that, some Christian faiths, they believe that the worship of animal is primitive. There's a term for this type of animal worship. It's called zulatry. Like you have idolatry, you have zulatry. It seems. So people may hear that we worship God in the form of a fish, the form of the boar, and they may just see it as animal worship. It's not it's not authentic God worship because again, they have this subconscious belief that animals are inferior. So therefore, if God takes on the form of an animal, it must make him inferior. But we can understand how, even though he comes as an animal, that he maintains his transcendental position by a couple things, which I'll go through shortly before finishing. Number one, his appearance. Whether Krishna appears as himself or whether he appears as an animal, many of his appearances, they happen in many wonderful ways. If we look into the Matsya pastime and how he appears and how the pastime progresses, we can see that, yes, he may be coming as a fish, but he's not a normal fish. When Matsya appeared in front of Manu, as Manu was performing penances by the river, he appeared as the size of a goldfish in the form of what looked like a goldfish. Immediately, you can tell that he's not a normal fish because he just begins to talk to Manu. He begins to beg Manu for protection. Can normal fish do that? No. Beyond that, when Manu agrees to offer him protection, within a very short amount of time, he goes from being the size of a goldfish to hundreds of miles long, to the point where he was so big that he took up a large portion of the ocean. It's at that point that Manu, being intelligent, he could recognize this is not a normal fish. No normal fish can go from being the size of a goldfish to the size that he is now. This must be the Supreme Lord. So the conclusion that Manu came to was the conclusion of any intelligent human being. Of course, to be like Manu, a person must have faith, and that faith is based on knowledge. That's a whole nother conversation, but still, this is the conclusion that an intelligent person would come to. We look at his form as Varaha. Varaha, he first of all came out of Brahma's nostril, Brahma being the creator of the universe. And within a very short amount of time, he grew to massive proportions, bigger even than some of the planets within the solar system. So while we may see normal boars as being very dirty animals, very simple animals, Varaha, he showed that he wasn't a normal boar. And on top of that, he defeated the most powerful demon at the time, Hiranyaksha. He carried he carried the very earth on his tusks for a long period of time. So, forgetting the fact that, of course, not everyone will believe these stories, forgetting that for those of us who do, who have some faith, which is based on knowledge, then we can see this isn't the activities of a normal boar. God appears in many wonderful ways, whereas most of the living entities in these forms, whether it be a fish, whether it be a boar, or even a human being, they usually appear in quite repulsive ways. You can look up, I've seen documentaries of fish taking birth, for example. It's not a very beautiful sight to see. It's not a very wonderful sight to see. On top of appearance, the second way that we can tell, again, that the Lord in the form of an animal is not normal, is not mundane, is not material, is because he performs amazing feats in his pastimes as those avatars. And the purport to Bhagavad Gita, verse 11 of chapter 9, it's explained that the reason he can perform such feats is because he doesn't have a material body. He has a Satchidananda body. Those with material bodies, they have certain limitations. But God having a Satchidananda body, he can perform superhuman acts which no material body can hope to perform. Some of the feats of his animal avatars, which show that they are material. Again, I've mentioned some of the Matsya pastime and what happened there. He grew from the goldfish size to massive proportions, as well as that he he saved Manu and many other living entities by tying to his horn an ark, a, a boat, a ship, which carried many of the living entities on this world. It's quite interestingly, it's quite similar to Noah's Ark from the Bible. Similar kind of story. And during that point, he also spoke Vedic wisdom. Again, most human beings today couldn't speak Vedic wisdom as concisely as Matsya spoke it. Some may even say that many quote unquote Brahmanas these days couldn't speak the Vedas or Vedic wisdom as concisely as Matsya spoke it. So these feats, they show that he's not a normal fish. There's also the animal avatar Kruma who appeared. Kruma supported the Mandara mountain on his back, and while it was being churned on his back, resting in his back, he didn't feel any inconvenience. He felt like the mount was scratching an itch. He felt relieved. He was enjoying the experience. So, first of all, we understand from that pastime of the demons and the demigods churning the ocean of milk, even with the combined efforts of all of them, they couldn't lift the Mandara mountain. And in fact, as they were trying to lift it, they ended up dropping it, and many of them got killed or injured. It took Lord Vishnu to come on Garuda's back to carry it. He picked it up very easily and transported it to the ocean of milk, that they could even do anything about it. But even then, when they tried to churn the mountain, because it was so heavy, it just sunk into the ocean, so they couldn't do it. That's where Kurma appeared. Kurma very easily on his back. He must have been like massive to be able to lift Mandara mountain. Yeah, he supported it very easily and enjoyed the experience. Is that the is that anything like what a normal turtle tortoise could do? No. Hayagriva, who was also mentioned in this purport to this Bhagavatam verse today, it's explained that when ignorance personified assumed the form of a demon, he stole all the Vedas from the mouth of Lord Brahma and took them down to the planet of Rasatala. And Hayagriva, coming in the form of a horse, he went down and he retrieved the Vedas and returned them to Lord Brahma. Not the activities of a normal horse. So again and again in the Bhagavatam, all these avatars, despite being in the forms of animals, they show by their feats that they aren't material. They perform superhuman feats which only someone with a Satchidananda body could perform. A body which isn't governed by the laws of material nature. So to finish, by understanding these points, by understanding the transcendental position of the Lord, we are awarded as devotees. And the verse in the Bhagavad Gita, verse 9 of chapter 4 explains this. Janma karma chame divyam evan yo veti tattvataha taktva dehang punarujanma naiti mam eti sorjuna. Krishna explains, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Reading this verse, I can now understand maybe a small fraction of why Prabhupada keeps emphasizing these points and why he emphasizes this point in the purport to today's verse. If we're able to understand Krishna's transcendental position, despite his appearance in forms that we may see also in the material world, we are able to eventually, at the end of this life, go back to Godhead through understanding the Lord's transcendental nature. So if we're not convinced, then we should continue to read Prabhupada's books and become more convinced. Acquire faith in Krishna's transcendental nature through knowledge. Because faith is based not on sentiment, but theoretical knowledge which has been internalized, which has been assimilated and realized. I'll finish there. Does anybody have any comments or questions, reflections?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam. Thank you very much. Explain the verse so nicely about the opulence of the Lord in particular. And particularly the concluding part you have told, verse they have told 4.9 that Janma Karma Chame Divyam Evam Jogati Tattadeha Punar Janmana Iti Mam Iti Shorjana. And there Lord has told who knows the Lord, the Tattva, and that's why Prabhupada has told it is the science of Krishna consciousness. It is not a mere sentiment, but it is a science. One has to understand it. But unlike the material science, one has to understand it from a devotee of the Lord, because the Lord has told only a devotee knows the Lord. Bhaktyamam Abhijanati. So we have to learn it from a pure devotee, what is the qualities of the Krishna, and by hearing only, that is the process one can purify ourselves from our material contamination and understand the Lord properly. Because otherwise, by speculation, as Prabhupada is told, finally he comes, I mean, 7.19, Prabhupada in explanation is told that again he finally understand that Krishna is the supreme. And Mahatma Shudulava, he told that, but that is the, why should I spend my time in this way? When it is possible to know much quickly through Bhakti Yoga. So only by Bhakti Yoga we can understand the Lord, and you have very nicely told. And the power of all these qualities, whatever and wherever it has come from the Lord. And it is the very first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, Janmadi or Shojatha. Everything has come from him. At the same time, in Bhagavad Gita also 10.8, the Lord says that I am the source of everything in this material and spiritual everywhere. So if we know that, then whoever has tried to understand it, he can understand that whatever he possesses comes from the Lord. And the Lord is giving, so long it is giving, he can take away at any time. So as you have also explained. So when a person understands that, he is not to become proud. Otherwise, in a material concept, he wants to be the lord of his actions, and in this way, he wants that he wants to take the credit. But a devotee knows everything has come from the Lord, and so let us remain faithful to the Lord, and by His mercy, so long we serve Him, He will be. And in other words, our aim is to please the Lord by serving. And this is the difference between a materialist person and a devotee. And you have very nicely explained that point. So thank you very much once again for your nice class. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for sharing also your realizations on the topic.
Hare Krishna, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for the beautiful class. I had some realization about what you mentioned about worshiping the animals and how the Lord appears in different forms. For my realization was when I was listening for Bhaktivedanta Maharaj lectures. He said that miracle is one of the spiritual path evidences of Lord. It should not be an everyday thing, but it can become an everyday thing, as you mentioned also about you see the light of sun, you see Krishna in every little thing, and life becomes miracles. With taste of water, you can remember that's Krishna. But when they see the Lord's pastimes, when He appears in the forms of fish or turtle or any animal form, it's like a miracle that Lord is so mighty that He gives us, this um, outstanding miracles, things like we see that the fish Matsya appearing in the little goldfish and then growing fast. So every minute of Lord's existence in this material world in fish form was miracle. So yeah, it's something that gives us this amazing understanding of Lord's greatness. Yeah, that was my realization of today's lecture. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad that I was able to add some value today.
Krishna Prabhu, it appears there's no other person to make any comment. So thank you very much once again for the very nice class. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyeva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo
वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः।
अनंत कोटि वैष्णव बिंदु की
वैष्णव
जय।
बिंदु
Hi.
की जय।
श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। हिज ग्रेस
जय
मनोभिराम प्रभु की जय।
जय।
गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल।
हरि हरि
All
बोल।
glories to